The storage unit was number 47. Margaret had driven past the facility on Kellner Road 100 times over 23 years of marriage without ever stopping. Harold had always handled it himself. First of the month, reliable as a tide. He would leave after breakfast on a Saturday and return by noon smelling of dust and old cardboard. She had never asked what was inside. She had never thought to. That was the thing she kept returning to in the weeks after the funeral. Not the grief, exactly. The grief was its own country, vast and featureless, and she was learning to navigate it 1 hour at a time. What she kept returning to was simpler and more bewildering than grief. She had been married to a man for 23 years, and she had never asked what was in the storage unit. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Left Behind, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. She had almost nothing left. No one knew what was waiting. Keep watching. She had thought she knew Harold Voss completely. That was the kind of certainty that comes from 2 decades of shared breakfasts and shared silences and shared arguments about whether the thermostat should be at 68 or 70. You stop asking who a person is because the answer seems obvious. He was Harold. He fixed things without being asked. He remembered the anniversary of her mother's death when she forgot it herself. He made coffee too strong and apologized for it every single morning for 23 years without ever making it weaker. She had known him. She had been sure of it. The key turned up in his desk drawer, which she had been going through with the particular hollow attention of a person performing a task too large to feel. The key was on a plain ring with a small orange tag. Unit 47. The number was written in Harold's handwriting, the compact and deliberate handwriting of a man who had been an accountant for 31 years and believed that numbers written sloppily became dangerous. There was a second key on the ring, this one smaller, older, the kind made before everything became digital and disposable. She didn't recognize it. She set both keys on the kitchen counter and looked at them for a long time, her coffee going cold in the mug beside them. Her daughter Renata called that evening from Portland. "How are you managing?" she asked, and Margaret said fine the way you say fine when fine is the only word available to you. They talked about the arrangements, the thank you notes that still needed sending, the question of Harold's tools in the garage that Renata's husband had offered to take if Margaret didn't need them. Margaret said she would think about it. She looked at the keys on the counter while they talked. She did not mention them. The night before she had been asked to leave the house, she had sat in Harold's chair in the study and tried to understand how 23 years could have arrived at this particular point. The house on Mercer Street was Harold's before they married. His name on the deed, a fact that had never seemed to matter because the house had been theirs in every way that mattered. The garden she had built in the backyard from what had been cracked concrete, the shelves in the study she had filled with books he sometimes read, and she always read, the kitchen where she had learned his particular appetite for quiet Sunday mornings. When Harold died of a heart attack on a Wednesday in February, gone before the ambulance arrived, she had thought her grief would be the worst thing. She had not anticipated his son. Marcus was 42 and had driven in from Columbus the morning after Harold died. He had his father's jaw and none of his father's patience. And he had arrived with a briefcase and a family attorney and a copy of a will that Margaret had not known existed. Harold had made the will in 2019 without telling her. He had revised it 18 months before his death. The house on Mercer Street would pass to Marcus. The savings, most of them, would pass to Marcus. Margaret was left with the joint checking account, which held $11,000, and the contents of the house that had been hers before the marriage, which she could identify and remove within 30 days. She had read the will 3 times. Then she had folded it and set it on the kitchen table and looked at the window over the sink where her dahlias were coming in, and she had felt something she could not name then and could not name now. It was not the hot feeling of immediate betrayal. It was slower and colder and more specific than that. It felt like discovering that the ground you had been standing on for 23 years had always been slightly thinner than you believed. Marcus had not been unkind. That was perhaps the most difficult thing. He had said, with genuine regret in his voice, that he was sorry for her loss, that he understood this was complicated, that he hoped she would be comfortable. She had thanked him. She did not know why she had thanked him, but she had, because 23 years of manners do not disappear in a single afternoon. She had stayed in a hotel for the first week. The Hampton Inn off Route 9, where the hallways smelled of industrial cleaning products and the coffee in the lobby was available 24 hours a day, and she drank too much of it because sleeping was difficult and the alternative to sleeping was lying in the dark thinking about Harold. She thought about Harold the way you think about someone when you were trying to decide whether you knew them. She thought about the Saturday mornings at the storage unit. She thought about the quiet in him that she had always read as contentment and was now reading as something else, something she couldn't fully make out, the way you can't make out a word on a page when the page is too close to your face. She needed distance to read it. She was trying to find the distance. It was in the hotel room on a Thursday night that she opened the envelope she had found tucked under the keys in Harold's desk drawer. She had carried it with her for 2 weeks without opening it because she had been afraid of what it contained and also afraid of what it wouldn't contain. She had been carrying it the way you carry something breakable, careful not to look at it too directly. The envelope had her name on it in Harold's handwriting. Margaret, not Marg, not Honey, just Margaret, which was how he wrote her name when he was being precise about something. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, and behind it, another document she did not immediately understand. She read the letter first. He had not written it like a man preparing to die. He had written it like a man who expected to have more time, but was practical enough to prepare for less. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that the will was something he had done during a period of difficulty with Marcus, a period she had not known was as serious as it apparently was, and that he had intended to revise it again, but had not. He wrote that he understood this was inadequate. He wrote that he hoped what he was giving her would help. Then he wrote about the storage unit. He had rented it in 2003, the year after their wedding. He had paid a fee every month for 2 decades from a small account she had not known existed. Inside the unit was not what she had imagined. She had imagined old furniture, boxes of things neither of them needed, the accumulated sediment of a life. What was inside the unit, he wrote, was something he had been working on since before they married. Something he needed her to see before she decided anything. He wrote one more sentence at the bottom. He wrote, "I know you will understand when you're ready. I kept the small key because I wasn't ready to give it to you yet. Now you're the one who decides." She had read the letter 4 times. Then she had set it down on the hotel bedspread and looked at the 2 keys in her hand, the plain one for the unit and the small one whose purpose she still didn't know, and she had felt the strange compressed sensation of someone standing at the edge of something that has no visible bottom. The next morning, she drove to Kellner Road. The facility was the kind of place that exists in the middle distance of every small city, noticed and forgotten 100 times a day. Chain-link fence, concrete block buildings painted industrial beige, a keypad at the entrance with a code she found written on the back of the envelope. She entered the code. The gate rolled open. She drove in. Unit 47 was at the end of the 3rd row near the back fence. The door was a roll-up metal door with a padlock that the key on the plain ring opened after a moment of resistance, the resistance of a lock that had not been opened in several months. She pulled the door up. The smell reached her before the light did. It was not the smell she expected. She had expected dust, mildew, the particular staleness of enclosed spaces. What she smelled instead was wood. Clean wood and linseed oil, and beneath that, the faint ghost of the same workshop smell that had always clung to Harold's clothes when he came home on Saturday afternoons. She stood in the doorway and waited for her eyes to adjust. The unit was not full of boxes. It was not full of old furniture or discarded appliances or any of the things people put in storage units because they cannot bring themselves to throw them away. What filled the space, arranged with Harold's particular orderly precision, was a workshop. A folding workbench along the back wall. Tools hung on pegboard, each one outlined in marker so you could see at a glance if something was missing. Cans of stain and shellac on a wooden shelf. A space heater in the corner. An extension cord running along the baseboard. And along the left wall, stacked with careful spacing between them, finished pieces. She stepped inside. She walked to the left wall and looked at the pieces stacked there. There were 12 of them. Boxes, mostly of different sizes. Jewelry boxes, memory boxes, The kind of thing you would call keepsakes containers if you were selling them, though they were far too beautiful for that word. She picked up the nearest one, a box perhaps 12 inches long by 8 wide, made of wood so dark it was nearly black, inlaid with a thin strip of lighter wood along the lid in a pattern she recognized after a moment as the skyline of a city. She turned it over. Harold's initials were pressed into the bottom in the small stamp he had apparently used, HV, a detail so intimate and so completely unknown to her that she had to set the box down. She looked around the workshop. She looked at the pegboard with its outline tools. She looked at the workbench with its vise and its careful array of chisels. She looked at the extension cord in the space heater and the small electric lantern on the shelf, the kind you use when the overhead light isn't enough. She thought about 23 years of Saturday mornings. She thought about the smell of linseed oil on his clothes that she had always attributed to some project in the garage. He had been here. He had been here every first Saturday of the month for 23 years, in this concrete room with his tools and his wood and whatever music he listened to when no one was listening with him. He had made things. He had made beautiful things and stacked them against the wall and gone home and said nothing. She found a notebook on the shelf below the tools. A green cloth-covered notebook, the kind you find in art supply stores, its spine slightly cracked with use. She took it down and opened it. It was a project log. Harold's compact accountant's handwriting, dates and dimensions and materials. The kind of notes a person keeps when they are serious about what they are doing and want to be able to do it again. She flipped to the first entry. August 2003, the year after their wedding. Walnut, he had written. First attempt at dovetail joint. Acceptable. Need more practice before I make the real thing. She flipped forward. The entries went on for 20 years. Dates and materials and honest assessments. January 2009. Cherry wood from the demo on 4th Street. Better grain than anything I've bought at the yard. February 2014. The hinges on the maple box are wrong. We'll redo. She read the entries slowly, her standing in the middle of the storage unit with a notebook open in her hands, and she felt something she had no word for. It was not grief, and it was not anger, and it was not quite joy. It was something older and quieter than any of those, the feeling of discovering that a person you thought you had finished learning was still somehow in the process of being revealed. Near the back of the notebook, she found what she was looking for without knowing she had been looking for it. March 2022. The commission for the cedar chest is done. Took longer than I planned because the dovetails on the front panel gave me trouble. I don't accept trouble from dovetails anymore. Starting on something I've been putting off. Something for Margaret. If I don't do it now, I'll keep putting it off, and she deserves better than that. She stopped reading. She looked up at the stacked pieces along the wall. She looked at the smaller ones and the larger ones, and then she saw, in the back corner, something she had not seen when she first came in, something that had been too large to register immediately as a single object. A cedar chest, the kind you put at the foot of a bed, perhaps 4 feet long, 2 feet wide. Dark wood with a pattern of inlay she recognized immediately because she had once, 15 years ago, pointed to a similar pattern in the window of an antique store and said, "I've always loved that." Harold had said nothing. She had forgotten about it the next day. He had not forgotten about it. She walked to the chest and stood in front of it and looked at the small lock set into the hasp of the lid. She looked at the small key on the ring. She thought about what Harold had written. "I kept the small key because I wasn't ready to give it to you yet. Now you are the one who decides." She was shaking slightly. She was aware of this without being able to stop it. She put the key in the lock and turned it. The lid opened on silent hinges. Harold believed in silent hinges. He had said so once, offhandedly, when he was fixing a cabinet door in the kitchen, and she had not thought about it again until this moment. He had said that a hinge you could hear was a hinge that wasn't doing its job. Inside the chest, folded carefully in acid-free tissue paper, was a quilt. She recognized the fabric immediately, her throat tightening before she understood why. Blue and white, and the particular faded green of a dress she had worn when they first met, a dress she had given to a charity shop in 2011. Harold had told her he didn't know what had happened to it. He had been lying. And the lie had been a kindness, because he had cut the dress into pieces and incorporated it into a quilt that also contained fabric she recognized from shirts she had loved that wore out, and curtains from the first apartment they shared before Mercer Street, and a blouse of her mother's that she had given Harold to take to the donation center after her mother died, and that she had missed for years without saying so. He had been collecting these things. For how long, she could not say. For years. He had been collecting the worn-out and discarded fabrics of her life, and he had sewn them into something that could be held. She had not known he could sew. She had not known he could do any of this. Beneath the quilt, folded in the same tissue paper, was an envelope. She recognized the handwriting and understood, before she opened it, that there was more. She sat down on the concrete floor of Storage Unit 47 with her back against the cedar chest Harold had made for her. She was 68 years old, and she had just buried her husband and been removed from her home. And she was sitting on the floor of a concrete room where her husband had spent 23 years becoming someone she had never fully met. She opened the second envelope. The document inside was a property deed. She recognized the form from the one time in her life she had held such a thing, when she and Harold had completed the paperwork that put her name on a house she did not know at the time she would be removed from. This deed was different. It was for a parcel of land and a structure in a town called Heron Lake, in the eastern part of the state, 4 hours from Mercer Street. The deed was dated 2017. The structure was described as a single-family residence, currently unoccupied and in need of renovation. In Harold's handwriting, at the bottom of the deed, he had written 4 words. "This one is yours." She sat with those words for a long time. She sat with them until the light through the open roll-up door had shifted from morning gray to full pale morning. She sat with the deed in her hands and the quilt in the chest behind her and the notebook on the floor beside her, and she thought about Harold on his Saturday mornings. She thought about what it meant to keep a secret, not from cruelty, but from the particular kind of love that needed to be ready before it was given. She could not yet decide how she felt about the years of not knowing. That was a question she would carry for longer, the way you carry questions that have no clean answer, holding them against you like the weight of something you have learned the shape of. But the deed was in her hands. The key was in the lock of a chest that contained the worn-out fabric of her life sewn into something warm. And 4 hours east, in a town she had never visited, there was a structure with her name on it. She stood up. She dusted off her coat. She took the quilt out of the cedar chest and folded it over her arm. She took the deed and the notebook and the 2 envelopes, and she carried them to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. The gate of the storage facility was visible in the rearview mirror. She thought about Marcus in the house on Mercer Street, going through Harold's tools in the garage, the tools that had apparently never been the tools she thought they were. She thought about 30 days and $11,000 and the question of where a woman goes when the place she has lived for 23 years is given to someone else. She looked at the deed. Then she put the car in drive. The town of Heron Lake announced itself with a gas station and a grain elevator and a water tower with the town's name painted on it in letters that had been fading for at least a decade. Margaret drove through the center of it slowly, the way you drive through a place you're trying to read. A diner with a hand-lettered sign. A hardware store that looked like it had been there since before anyone thought to question whether hardware stores would always be there. A post office the size of a large closet. 2 churches on opposite corners of the same intersection. A detail that struck her as both practical and quietly contentious. She had the address from the deed and the coordinates from her phone, which had been recalculating for the last 40 minutes, because the roads east of the town center were the kind that exist in the margins of maps. She turned where the phone told her to turn, and then turned again onto a gravel road that ran along the edge of a shallow lake. The water gray and still in the April light, ringed with the bare gray branches of trees that had not yet decided it was spring. The property was at the end of the road. She stopped the car and looked at it through the windshield for a long moment before she got out. It was a farmhouse. Not the romantic version of a farmhouse that people put on calendars, but the real version, the version that has been standing in a field through enough winters to show them all. White paint gone gray and peeling in long strips. A porch that sagged on the left side, where one of the support posts had settled into the earth at an angle. Two windows on the upper floor with their shutters hanging crooked, one open and one closed, like a face with one eye shut. A barn behind the house, smaller than the house. Its red paint faded to the color of old brick. The grass around the house was high and winter-flattened, the kind that has been unmowed for at least one full season and possibly two. A line of lilac bushes along the fence line, bare now, but enormous, the kind that come from decades of growth left to its own purpose. It looked, she thought, like a place that had been waiting. She got out of the car. The air smelled of lake water and cold mud, and the particular mineral smell of soil that has just begun to think about warming. She stood in it for a moment, breathing. Then she walked toward the house. The porch steps held her weight, though the second one flexed in a way that she noted and did not ignore. The porch boards themselves were sounder than they looked. Harold had built things to last, and she wondered now, standing on another man's porch. Her porch, she reminded herself, this was her porch. She had a deed that said so. She wondered how many times Harold had stood in this same spot. How many Saturday afternoons he had spent here while she believed he was at the storage unit on Kellner Road. She put the key in the front door lock. The deed had come with no key. She had stopped at a locksmith in the last town before Heron Lake and described the type of lock as best she could and been given two possibilities. The second one had turned in the lock of the storage unit chest, and she tried it now in the front door with the same quality of held breath. It turned. The door opened inward with the sound of a house that has been closed for some time. A deep exhale, the pressurized air of sealed rooms meeting the outside. She stepped into the front hall. The smell was cold and still, and beneath that wood, the same linseed oil she had smelled in the storage unit, faint but present, the olfactory signature of Harold's particular attentiveness. She understood then that he had been here recently enough to leave that smell behind. She understood that recently was a word she would need to examine carefully. The front hallway ran straight through to the back of the house. Wooden floors, heart pine by the look of them, old enough to have the depth of grain that comes from trees that no longer grow at that pace. They were dusty but intact, no warping, no buckling, no sign of the water damage that ruins old floors. Harold had looked at these floors, she thought. He had assessed them the way she had watched him assess things, silently, thoroughly, with the patience of a man who believed that a thing examined properly required no second examination. She moved through the house slowly, room by room. The parlor on the left of the hallway had a fireplace with a brick surround, the mortar between the brick sound. A window facing the lake. The lake was visible from here through the bare branches of a large oak at the edge of the property, a silver rectangle of water in the middle distance. She stood at the window and looked at it. She thought about Harold writing, "This one is yours." She thought about him standing at this same window deciding. The kitchen at the back of the house was the room that told her the most. It had been worked on, not finished, not close to finished, but begun. The old cast-iron sink had been cleaned and reseated. New supply lines ran to it, copper, the connections neat and tight. The cabinet frames along one wall had been stripped of their old paint and sanded to bare wood, the work of a man who was planning to refinish them, who had gotten as far as the preparation and then run out of something, time, health, the particular Saturday mornings that had always seemed renewable until they weren't. On the kitchen counter, pushed to the back near the window, was a small wooden box. She recognized the construction immediately. The same dovetail joints as the pieces in the storage unit. The same dark stain. She picked it up. It was the size of a large paperback book. She turned it over and found Harold's HV stamp pressed in the bottom. She opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, and beneath it, a ring of keys. 3 keys, each labeled in Harold's handwriting on small adhesive tags. Front door. Pawn. Cellar. She unfolded the paper. It was not a letter this time. It was a list. Harold made lists the way other people breathe, automatically, precisely, with the implicit belief that a thing written down was a thing that could be done. She had found lists in his desk drawers over the years. Lists of groceries and maintenance tasks and books he meant to read, and she had always found them endearing in a way she had never fully articulated to him, because it had seemed too small a thing to mention. Now she stood in a kitchen in a town called Heron Lake holding a list he had made for a house she had not known existed, and she thought, I should have mentioned it. I should have told him that his lists made me feel safe. The list was titled in capital letters, "What Needs Doing." Below that, in order, porch post left side, new sill on east bedroom window, kitchen cabinets, refinish and rehang, plumbing throughout, checked, functional, confirmed before winter. Roof, inspected 2021, sound for 5 more years minimum. Barn door hinges. Electrical, updated 2019 by Calhoun Electric, Heron Lake, ask for Dennis. The lilacs need cutting back, but wait until after they bloom. She read the list twice. She read it the way you read something that was written for you by someone who knew you well enough to know you would need it practical and specific and without sentiment. Harold had never been a sentimental writer. His birthday cards to her had always said exactly what they needed to say and nothing more, and she had kept every one of them. And now she understood that this list, this practical itemized accounting of what a house required, was also a kind of love letter. It was a love letter from a man who expressed love through the assessment of sill conditions and the recommendation of electricians by first name. At the bottom of the list, below a line he had drawn to separate it from the rest, he had written one more thing. The cellar. Look at the cellar last. I think you'll understand when you see it. She put the list in her pocket. She took the ring of keys. She stood in the kitchen and looked out the back window at the barn and the flattened winter grass and the lake beyond the property line, gray and patient. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Left Behind. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and there are so many more waiting to be told. She did not go to the cellar immediately. She had learned something from 23 years with Harold, which was that the things worth seeing were worth approaching with preparation. She went through the rest of the house first. The 2 bedrooms upstairs, both sound, both with the stripped and sanded floors that told her Harold had gotten this far in his plans. The bathroom with its old clawfoot tub that had been recaulked and fitted with new supply lines. The smaller room at the end of the upstairs hall that had no obvious purpose and that she stood in for a long time, turning slowly, feeling the particular quality of its light through the east-facing window, thinking, this could be something. This could be made into something. She went back outside and walked around the perimeter of the house before she went to the barn. The foundation was stone, fieldstone set without mortar the old way, the way that has lasted 2 centuries in houses across this part of the country, because it was done correctly from the beginning. The chimney was sound. The gutters on the back side needed replacement, but the fascia boards behind them were dry and intact. She went to the barn. The barn door hinges, as Harold's list had noted, needed attention. The right door dragged. She lifted it slightly as she pulled, and it opened enough for her to enter. Inside, the barn smelled of old hay and cold air and the absence of animals that had once been present. The floor was packed earth. The beams overhead were hand-hewn, the axe marks still visible in them after what she estimated from the style and the wood was 150 years or more. In the back corner of the barn, under a canvas tarp weighted at the corners with cinder blocks, was a truck. A pickup truck, older, the kind that was made when trucks were made to last rather than to look like they were about to launch into orbit. She lifted the corner of the tarp. The truck was dark green, paint intact, no visible rust on the body panels. She found the key on the labeled ring. She tried it in the door. The door opened. She sat in the driver's seat. The interior smelled of Harold, specifically of Harold, of his particular combination of coffee and woodworking and the soap he had used every morning for as long as she had known him. She sat there without trying to start it. She just sat in it and breathed. After a while, she got out and covered it again with the tarp. She had been at the property for 3 hours when she finally went to the cellar. The cellar door was on the east side of the house, the kind of slanted exterior door that opens from outside and leads down. The key on the ring opened the padlock without resistance. She pulled the door open and looked down concrete steps into darkness. She found a light switch on the wall at the bottom of the steps. A single bulb came on. The cellar ran the full footprint of the house. Stone walls, stone floor, the stones fitted with the same care as the foundation. It was dry. That was the first thing she registered. The cellar of a house this old and this close to a lake had no business being this dry, and the dryness told her something about the work that had gone into it. Water management, drainage, the patient, invisible labor of a person who understood that a wet cellar destroys everything above it, and who had addressed the problem before addressing anything else. Along the east wall, on shelves Harold had built from the same raw lumber he used in the storage unit workshop, were boxes. They were labeled in Harold's handwriting. She walked to the shelves and read the labels. Margaret, childhood. Margaret, her mother. Margaret, early years. Margaret, letters from before we met. Margaret, the garden, seeds and tools. Margaret, books she has read twice. She stood in front of the shelves and looked at the boxes for a long time. He had been collecting her. That was the only way she could put it. Over the course of their marriage, in the incremental, quiet way, he did everything. He had been assembling the archive of her life. The things that had passed through their home and been set aside, things she had thought were gone. Her mother's recipe cards, the letters she had kept in a shoebox that she had assumed were lost in one of their moves, the seed packets she saved from the garden each autumn out of habit without expecting to use them again. He had taken them. He had labeled them and shelved them in a dry cellar 4 hours from their home, and he had never said a word. She opened the box labeled Margaret, her mother. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were things she recognized one by one and could not have described to anyone without crying. Her mother's reading glasses. A small icon her mother had kept on her nightstand. 3 photographs Margaret had never seen before. Her mother young, before Margaret was born, standing in a field somewhere with her hand raised to shade her eyes, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Harold had found these somewhere. She did not know where. She did not know how long he had held them. She sat down on the stone floor of the cellar. The single bulb put its plain light over everything. She sat with the box in her lap and looked at the photograph of her mother young and laughing. She thought about Marcus in the house on Mercer Street with the will Harold had not gotten around to revising. She thought about $11,000 in 30 days and the Hampton Inn off Route 9. She thought about the house above her head with its sound foundation and its heart pine floors and its list of what needed doing. She thought about Harold making that list, sitting at this kitchen counter or at the workbench in the storage unit, writing it out in his compact, deliberate hand, writing it for her, writing it for the version of her that would arrive here after everything else was gone. He had known something she had not known. He had known, or feared, or prepared for the possibility that the house on Mercer Street might not hold. He had not told her because he had wanted to give it to her differently, in person, on a Saturday, when the lilacs were blooming and he could walk her through the rooms and show her what he had been doing with his time. He had waited too long for that Saturday. The heart attack on a Wednesday in February had taken his ability to give it to her the way he wanted. So he had given it to her the only way left to him, in layers, in keys and lists and boxes labeled with her name. She stayed in the cellar for a long time. She was not ready to leave it yet. When she finally climbed the concrete steps back into the late afternoon light, the lake was catching the horizontal sun and throwing it back in long gold lines across the water. The lilac bushes along the fence line were enormous in the low light, their bare branches complex and intricate against the sky, and she could see, if she looked closely, the very first swelling of the buds that would open in a few weeks. Harold had written, "Wait until after they bloom." She would wait. She walked around to the front of the house and stood on the sagging porch and looked out at the gravel road and the lake beyond it and the bare trees and the late light. She took the list from her pocket and read it again. Porch post left side. She looked at the porch post. She put her hand on it and felt the give in it, the softness of wood that had been compromised by moisture over too many seasons. She had watched Harold assess wood for 23 years. She had paid more attention than she had realized. She put the list back in her pocket. She went inside and found the kitchen and turned on the tap at the cast iron sink. The water ran brown for 30 seconds and then ran clear. Harold had written, "Plumbing throughout, checked, functional, confirmed before winter." She confirmed it. She turned off the tap. She stood in the kitchen in the fading light and looked at the cabinet frames Harold had stripped and sanded and had not gotten back to finish. She could finish them. She had never refinished a cabinet in her life. She had watched Harold refinish things for 23 years. She had watched him the way you watch a person doing something with complete competence, with the comfortable inattention of someone who believes the competent person will always be there to do it. She had been wrong about that, but she had also been watching, and some portion of what she had watched had settled into her without her knowing it, the way knowledge settles when you are near someone for long enough. She needed supplies. She needed more food than the bag she had brought from the Hampton Inn. She realized, quite a number of things, and the nearest place to get them was the hardware store she had passed in the center of Heron Lake. She picked up the ring of keys. She put on her coat. She thought about calling Renata and decided to wait until she had something to tell her that she could say without her voice breaking. She thought about Marcus in the house on Mercer Street and found that the thought had less weight than it had carried this morning. It was not that she had forgiven him, or that she had forgiven Harold for the will, or that she had resolved any of the complicated feelings that sat in her chest like stones of different sizes. It was simply that she had something to do, and the having of something to do was a mercy she had not expected to find. She locked the front door behind her. She drove back toward the center of Heron Lake. She did not know yet that the hardware store owner would be a woman named Gloria Pacheco, who had lived in Heron Lake her entire life, and who would recognize the property address when Margaret mentioned it, because everyone in Heron Lake knew the old Crestwood place. She did not know that Gloria would set down the can of wood stain she was shelving and look at Margaret with an expression she could not quite read and say, "So you're the wife." She did not know what that sentence would open. She did not know that Harold had been a figure in this town, in a quiet way, the kind of figure a person becomes when they appear reliably for years and work on a property alone and speak to the people they encounter with the directness that Harold had always carried. She did not know any of this yet. She parked in front of the hardware store. Through the window, she could see the warm light inside and a woman moving between shelves and the ordinary, beautiful abundance of a store that sells the things required to fix what is broken and build what is not yet standing. She went in. Gloria Pacheco was 64 years old and had the quality of someone who had spent decades listening carefully and speaking only when she had something worth saying. She set down the can of stain and looked at Margaret with an expression that contained several things at once. Recognition, something like relief, and underneath both of those, a careful watchfulness. "So you're the wife," she said. Margaret stood in the entrance of the hardware store with her coat still buttoned and the ring of keys in her hand. "Yes," she said. She did not yet know what she was confirming. Gloria came around the end of the shelving unit and extended her hand. "Your husband used to come in here," she said, "every time he was in town. First time was about 7 years ago. He came in for supplies. Cabinet hardware, wood stain, copper pipe fittings. We talked. He was a man you could talk to." She paused. "He said he was saving it, that he wanted the house to be ready first. I always wondered if Freddie would come." Margaret felt the familiar compressed sensation of discovering a room in a house she thought she knew completely. She was becoming accustomed to it. She was not becoming comfortable with it. "I need supplies," Margaret said, "for the house." Harold got as far as stripping the kitchen cabinets. "I need to finish what he started." Gloria looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Come on." She walked Margaret through the store with the authority of a person who knows exactly where everything is and exactly what everything is for. She pulled things from shelves and explained what each one did and why it mattered. And Margaret listened with the full attention of someone who has learned that inattention has costs she had not anticipated. By the time Margaret loaded the supplies into her car, the light had gone fully, and the main street of Heron Lake was lit by the orange intervals of its street lamps. "You have somewhere to stay tonight," Gloria said. "The house," Margaret said. "Harold left a truck in the barn. The plumbing works." Gloria studied her. Then she said, "There's a diner 2 blocks east. Tell Patrice I sent you. She'll give you the booth by the window." Margaret thanked her. Gloria nodded once, the nod of a woman who does not make unnecessary gestures, and went back inside. Margaret sat in her car for a moment before starting it. She thought about what Gloria had said. He said he was saving it, that he wanted it to be ready first. She thought about Harold's list. What needs doing? She thought about the kitchen cabinets with their bare sanded wood, and the porch post, and the east bedroom window, and all the particular things that a house requires before it is ready. She thought about Harold knowing, at some level, that he had run out of time for ready, and making the list anyway. writing it for the version of her that would arrive here after everything else was gone. She started the car. She worked through the following week with the focused attention of someone who has been given a clear task and understands that the task is also a mercy. She applied coats of stain to the cabinet frames. She called Dennis at Calhoun Electric, as Harold's list had suggested, and he came out and confirmed the electrical was sound and replaced 2 outlets that had been worrying him since 2019. He said, "Your husband was a thorough man." It was how people in Heron Lake seemed to speak about Harold, with a specific respectful fondness that told her he had been a presence here, someone who showed up reliably and left things better than he found them. She called Renata and told her everything. The storage unit and the workshop and the cedar chest and the quilt made from the worn-out fabrics of her life. The deed and the 4-hour drive and the house at the end of the gravel road. The cellar full of boxes labeled with her name. Renata was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom." "Just her name." "I know," Margaret said. "He never said anything," Renata said. "No," Margaret said. "But he was keeping me, even when I didn't know it." Renata booked a flight for the following weekend. She arrived on a Friday evening with her husband Martin, and Margaret met them on the porch and watched her daughter walk up the path with her hand raised to shade her eyes against the evening light, exactly as her grandmother had stood in the photograph from the cellar. And she thought, some things persist. Some things travel forward in the body without being taught. They walked through the house together. Renata ran her hand along the finished cabinet doors and stood at the parlor window looking at the lake, and went down to the cellar and read the labels on Harold's boxes in silence. When she came back up, she said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He was keeping you, even when you didn't know it." "Yes," Margaret said. They sat on the back porch that evening with the lake going gold in the fading light. The lilacs along the fence line had bloomed the week before, and their smell was still present in the cooling air, faint and particular. Martin said almost nothing, which was correct. Renata leaned her head against Margaret's shoulder. Margaret held her coffee mug with both hands and looked at the water. She thought about Marcus in the house on Mercer Street. She thought about the will and the 30 days and the hotel room and the $11,000 and the small orange key tag in Harold's desk drawer. She thought about how the thinness of that ground had been the thing that sent her here. She thought about what Harold had written at the bottom of the deed. "This one is yours." She had understood it as a legal fact when she first read it. She understood it fully now. Sitting on the back porch of a house, she was learning the way you learn a person, slowly, specifically with the growing certainty that the learning would not run out. She was 68 years old. She had been widowed and displaced, and had driven 4 hours on a gravel road to a house she had not known existed. She had refinished cabinet frames and replaced a porch post and opened a cellar door and found herself inside it, boxed and labeled and carefully kept. Harold had waited too long for ready. She had learned from this the way she was learning everything now. She was not going to wait. She was going to do what his list had always implied was the only correct approach. Begin with what is in front of you, do it carefully, and trust that the next thing will become visible when this one is done. The lake went dark. The first stars appeared above the tree line. The lilac smell moved through the cooling air, distinct and momentary, the smell of a thing that arrives on its own schedule regardless of whether you are ready for it. What was left behind was never truly lost. The right hands would always find it. She had found it, and now it was hers to carry forward, one careful morning at a time, in the same patient, incremental way it had always been built. She stayed on the porch until the stars were fully out. Then she went inside to make room for what came next. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. The people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, the videos on your screen right now are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. Left Behind has a story for you.